Well, hi, everyone, and welcome to the 2022 DocLands Documentary Film Festival. I'm Kelly Clement from the programming team, and I'm here with co-director Joseph Nizeti to talk about his film, River, which had its US premiere at Telluride Film Festival and now has been screening at film festivals all around the world. And as one reviewer has called this, the best IMAX movie IMAX never made. And I totally agree that this is definitely a visual experience that should be seen on the biggest screen possible. So welcome, Joseph. Thank you so much for sharing this.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. And Joseph, we might as well just jump right in. You were co-director and co-writer of this film, along with award-winning Australian filmmaker Jennifer Peetham. And I'm wondering how the two of you came together to undertake this amazing collaboration. How did this filmic journey begin?
Thanks, Kelly. Yeah, so I had the pleasure of working with the Australian Chamber Orchestra sort of many years ago when we were first approached, or when we first approached Jen Peetham to work on Mountain. So that was back in 2014. So I've known Jen for some 7 or 8 years now, and I had the real joy of working on the music department for Mountain and just getting to know Jen during that time and spend time with her. And then after the completion of that film in 2017, Jen invited me to begin working with her, first in sort of a story consultant capacity. And then, yeah, she just sort of, one day when we were planning out this film and she had a few other projects moving, she thought it would be a good idea to invite me along to join her as a co-writer and co-director on the film, which has just been an incredible honor. You know, Jen is just an extraordinary documentary director. She's a really leading talent in Australia. Not only does she make amazing films, but the best people in the Australian film industry want to work with her. So when you work with Jen, not only do you get Jen, but you get incredible editors, sound designers, composers who would typically be working on, the biggest budget Australian productions, are keen to, bring these documentaries to life. And as you say, kind of create something that's quite a powerful, visual experience.
Yeah, and you were also have a background in music, as a music composer, right? And there were several composers working on this film, and I was wondering, was there a division of responsibilities, and how did you all collaborate together?
So music plays a very big part in River, as it did in Mountain, and I think especially in comparison to a typical feature documentary, music plays a very big role. I mean, creatively, I guess the big goal of the project, the big dream of the project, is to give audiences an encounter with nature, a sort of a heightened encounter with nature. And for us, it's important that the imagery is important. It's important that the narration and the words tell a very clear, strong story. But the music is that sort of special sauce that then takes that all to the next level and really kind of elevates it into this sort of poetic domain. So in the overall just creative cocktail of the project, we always knew music was going to be incredibly important and that we needed to make a lot of room for music. So Richard Tognetti, the Australian violinist and composer, collaborated with Jen Peetham on Mountain. He's back again this time, but he's also joined by Piers Berbrook de Vere, who's a fantastic Australian feature film composer, and William Barton, who's really one of a kind. He's an extraordinary Indigenous vocalist, didgeridoo performer and composer, and his music concludes the film. Actually, the final piece of the music is from William Barton, and that was a really important creative piece of the puzzle for us to collaborate with an Indigenous musician and to sort of connect those final closing ideas of the film musically back to an Indigenous performer and someone with that really strong connection to country here in Australia.
Yeah, definitely did. And well, it was definitely an oral flow that, like the visual flow, just completely made this film so amazing. And I was just wondering, well, how did you work together?
Yeah, so working with Jen on the visuals, it always comes back to writing with Jen. So she's very big on structure. She's very big during the development period of a project, figuring out what the shape of the movie is, what the in and out is, what that core story is, what the core journey is. And sort of picking up where Mountain left off, we knew we wanted it to cover a similarly large period of time. Mountain is a story that works in geological time, and we wanted river to be the case too. But there's also a sense in which river is functioning on a smaller time scale than mountain, because rivers are far more susceptible to our harm than mountains are. You know, you can kind of blow the top of a mountain, but in general, they're going to outlast us. Rivers, you know, we can see that they can actually be destroyed in a generation. And so, yeah, with Jen, that collaboration really starts with story. And from there, once we've broken the story, once we've figured out this bigger journey between humans and rivers that we want to tell, then figuring out, yeah, how do we get that story across? How do we tell the story of ancient humanity? How do we tell the story of how technology has transformed our relationship with rivers in the last 100 years? So we sort of start very big and then move down. Then we had to flip to the other side as well and sort of start from the footage and come back up. The first day of production on this project was the first day of lockdown in Sydney due to the pandemic. And we'd originally planned to do a lot of shooting in India, in North America, and to travel around and pick up a lot of very specific sequences for the film. But, you know, when we realized that wasn't going to be possible, we started to just devise a different way to put the film together visually. And that was just through collaborating with this network of cinematographers that Jen had met through working on her previous films, Sherpa and Mountain, and also new cinematographers and friends that we made in the course of producing the film, just reaching out and finding other people who were able to travel in different parts of the world, so that we could do bespoke shooting of dams in places like Washington State in the US, or collaborating with a drone pilot in Norway to get that extraordinary drone shot, which appears sort of around 10, 15 minutes into the story. So yeah, collaborating with Jen on the visuals was very much about, yeah, always connecting back to that core story. We never want the film to just become wallpaper. We never want the film to just feel like, you know, a montage of pretty images. It always has to come back to telling that really strong core narrative about a relationship between humanity and nature that has sort of gone sour or lost its reverence, and the need for a journey back to reverence in our relationship with the rivers.
Yeah. So how many years was this in the making?
Yeah, I mean, we first started talking about a sequel project to Mountain soon after that project finished. So that film came out in 2017, and Mountain, much like River, had these two lives. Mountain was this theatrical release that also ended up on streaming, and then Mountain Live was commissioned by the Australian Chamber Orchestra with the idea that they would tour it live with orchestra. And I remember it was after a performance in London of Mountain Live that Jen was already thinking about water as the possibility for the next film, and that was in 2017. And it was over the course of the next couple of years, maybe 2018, 2019, we narrowed that down to River. And yeah, then we started speaking with Robert McFarlane, the writer who collaborated with us on Mountain, and just starting to find the parameters in the story. So all up from, you know, the first spark of the idea to the movie coming out, it's been 5 years. But I would say that the writing in earnest started about 3 years ago, and then that process of collating and collecting footage before the edit probably took 6 months to a year, kind of in fits and starts.
Wow, that's quite a journey.
Yes.
And then how did you decide on how much, how was this planned as far as live footage and archival footage? And
yeah.
nature and social.
Yeah, absolutely. It was, I mean, we had the benefit of having a lot of research time at the start of the project. So not just researching generally the topic of rivers and humanity and everything they've meant to us culturally, but in terms of vision of rivers. So we spent a lot of time researching photography around rivers, and a lot of time just researching what other projects have been done around rivers and river ecosystems, and just how to shoot rivers from above. When you stand beside the bank of a river, you get a very different experience to what you get when you're up in a helicopter or when you're filming it with a drone. And it was just great to have that time to think about all the things that rivers have meant to people, and the number of songs and poems and books and movies about river or with river in the title speak to how essential they have been, you know, to our species. Yes, so it's in terms of striking that balance between exploring rivers out in the wilds, you know, rivers kind of sans humans. That's very much the function of the first 15, 20 minutes of the movie, is to follow rivers as their own character. You know, you watch the birth of rivers, you look at rivers and they're all sculpting the earth and sculpting landscapes over geological time. Then humans enter the story. At first, it's this reverent relationship But yeah, with technology comes the power for us to actually lose our respect for rivers and lose our reverence for rivers. So that's very much how the film kind of chunks up. It's a sort of first act where we meet rivers, a second act where we introduce humans, and we're sort of suddenly able to make mistakes, when we can kind of command and corral and dam and divert rivers on such enormous scales. Then hopefully the third chapter is a bit of a return to reverence, and sort of, the case that we were able to make for finding that balance in terms of looking after the river so they can look after you, and factoring in long-term impacts into some of the decisions we're making now in the present.
Well, the beginning of the film, the footage looks like paintings. It felt like I was in a gallery, and many of the overhead shots appear like a circulatory artery system, like blood veins. It was very effective. Was that part of the plan?
Absolutely. I think the characterization of rivers as the arteries of the planet, and just the visual appearance of rivers, from space was just an instantly inspiring thing for us. And I think that's, it's kind of it was a bit overwhelming at first, because you'd see these images of these Icelandic braided rivers, which, we first saw these things and we just thought, well, audiences could look at this for 80 minutes nonstop and be pleased. And so it actually took a lot of self-control in the editorial process to figure out, okay, when are the targeted moments that we're showing these kind of really mind-blowing abstract rivers. And for us, that was a very kind of focused pocket at the front of the film, and then a very focused pocket about 2/3 of the way in, where you can just marvel in just their purely just abstract beauty, especially from above. And then the rest of the film was finding, the most visually interesting ways to communicate that relationship between humans and rivers, and how that might have changed, and how it still persists through agriculture in places like Southeast Asia compared to the kind of agriculture that we see now in North America.
Yeah, well, it was very effective. It just draws you in so much. And another stunning shot I just want to mention is, in my work as documentary programmer, I've seen many, many drone shots these days, perhaps too many, but there's that one stunning drone shot, unlike anything I've ever seen in a film, about 15 minutes into it. Can you tell us a little more about that, how that came to be?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, that's a case where we'd already actually sort of written and devised that sequence, and we'd thought through, okay, how do we tell the story of the birth of rivers on high? Rivers are born elsewhere in other ways, but this is how we wanted to start our journey, so that we could get this big physical journey from source to sea, and then complete the journey at the end of the film through, evaporation and these sort of rivers in the sky, as we call them. And so we knew we wanted this moment where the ice melted and the water began to run. And the first time we came across the work of that drone pilot, his name is Ralph Hogenberg, but he goes by the name Shaggy FPD, that's his YouTube handle. We were just totally blown away. And he'd been doing some of this shooting in Norway on these glaciers. And we reached out, he'd seen Mountain, and he was excited to collaborate with us. And again, this was during lockdown, we weren't able to travel. So being able to find someone who had done that kind of work in that location, and unbeknownst to them, it was the sort of perfect puzzle piece to help us tell our story in the most magnificent way. It was really exciting. And I do remember the first time we brought it into the office and kind of moved into the edit and saw how it played. But we had the same reaction that I hear a lot of audiences are now having to that shot. So it was really beautiful to collaborate with him and tell that part of the story in such an engaging and memorable way.
Yeah, it just moved the film into a whole different level.
Yeah, it sort of helps you become the river. And that was something we always wanted to do with the film as well, is to help embody this experience of downstream flow, moving with the river. There is a number of concepts in the film which could have become a bit technical and could have become a bit earth science, around sediment transport, for instance, which is an important process that happens with rivers. And we were excited to find the most engaging visual way to capture those kinds of ideas and help people really fall in love with rivers as characters, so that by the end of the film, when you see these outmoded, outdated, dangerous dams coming down, and you see that sediment transfer return, people are thinking back to the film and the wildness of rivers as they once were, and the importance of that wildness, not just to river ecosystems, but actually just to long-term sustenance of even the wetlands and agricultural lands that us humans depend on.
Yeah, that was another one of my points. Another of the stunning shots that comes when you realize how damaging dams can be. And then when you start seeing the dams being destroyed, and it was such a wonderful release, actually.
Mm. Yeah, it's an interesting story with dams. In Mountain, there's a similar kind of thematic story that plays out around a loss of reverence for mountains. And in that film, that's epitomized by this incredible sequence that Jen created on Everest, where you see these queues of people, you know, trying to get to the top, and obviously comment on the kind of lack of, or, you know, a perceived, you know, lack of spiritual reverence there for that incredibly spiritual place. In this film, yeah, the dams ended up becoming a very powerful symbol of our changed relationship with rivers. And it is exciting to know that around the world, some of these older dams, you know, that are approaching 100 years old now, especially in the United States, but that'll soon be happening in Europe and elsewhere, they're approaching the end of their life cycles, and that there is actually the political will to safely remove them, and allow the sediment to kind of continue on downstream, to allow a lot of river systems and other ecosystems like the salmon migrations in Washington State to resume. And it's amazing. You know, there's that line in the film, given the chance, their life pours back, and it's absolutely true. So it's quite exciting to see how quickly these ecosystems can recover from you know, years or decades of being hampered by something like a dam that's hasn't been constructed appropriately.
Yeah, something that we just take for granted, but it has to be addressed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there are no easy questions. It's obviously a case by case local kind of question in each place in the world. How do you manage water? You know, what are the decisions that you need to make in the short term so that you're not putting the lives of people at risk, that you're not actually exacerbating the risk of flooding. So it absolutely is a case by case thing. We're not saying all dams everywhere should come down tomorrow. There are certain places in the world where they're quite essential at the moment, or, you know, cities are being built up around dams, and buildings have been built in floodplains that would be in danger if dams were to come down immediately. So it's definitely the case that it's a case by case process to work out. But we hope our film can at least raise awareness and give people a clearer sense of the choices that we have there, and, you know, the fact that it is just really a matter of political will to investigate better solutions that will benefit those downstream of us.
Yeah, that's what makes this movie one of the more unique ones, that addresses something that we just take for granted and don't realize that it's something that needs to be addressed. Now, I thought it was just wonderful the way the film begins in black and white with the Australian Chamber Orchestra, Willem Dafoe setting up their instruments and getting ready to play. Did they watch the film as they played, or how did that work?
Yeah, so that sequence was, so that sequence was an important point for Jen, just to help settle in the audience to the fact that music was going to play a big role in the film. So River has these two lives. It lives as River, the theatrical release, and it lives as River live. So when they perform it live, it's actually them walking out on stage, and we don't play that part of the film. It's just, you know, a black screen with credits, and then the film begins. But we definitely wanted that feeling of the orchestra tuning up to be in the film, so the audience could settle in and just be conscious, you know, put it in their awareness that they're about to go into a musical experience. And yeah, it's quite, I think I find it just quite satisfying the couple of times that I've seen the movie in the cinema, just as a palate cleanser, as a kind of classical music lover and someone who comes from that world. I find something quite soothing about the sound of an orchestra tuning up. And I know even just that sound of an orchestra tuning up, that the mental preparation that gives you for what will follow is something that Jen really responds to as well. She was a violinist when she was younger. And I think that's a sound that's sort of very nostalgic for her and kind of puts her in that particular mindset of, here we go, you know, like what happens next before we open the curtain.
And then being introduced to the narrator.
Yes.
Unlike most nature films like this, you know, the narrator just you know, appears on the soundtrack, but here we have Willem coming out, and so you get close to him right in the beginning, and so for the rest of the film, you know, it's him.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's important too, because as a narrator, and we talked about this a lot during the writing of the project. As a narrator, he very much brings a character to the film. That there are sorts of things that the narrator in Mountain and the narrator in River says that you wouldn't typically hear in a typical nature documentary. There are comments that are more poetic in nature. There are comments that express a point of view more than you might have a typical sort of natural history narrator. And yeah, actually meeting him as a person and seeing him smiling in the opening and joking and laughing and getting set and tuning up his instrument, his voice, I think definitely prepares the audience for a storyteller, for someone to really take them on a journey. So that's quite effective there, I think, as well, just to not just have the orchestra, but to have Willem kind of readying himself to tell a story.
And he was more than willing to jump into this one.
Yeah, well, I think he just had a great experience working with Jen on the last film, and this is something he's spoken about as well. We were actually considering approaching female narrators in the first instance for this project, but Jen was speaking to Willem separately about a different project and had sort of said, but look, if we kind of come up short or aren't able to find someone we're looking for, would you be interested? And he said, absolutely, I'll happy to wait in the wings, and if you want me again, I'll be there in a heartbeat. So it was terrific. He actually stepped out of, he had a break in his production working on Spider-Man in Atlanta. And we just organized a studio for him, and he popped into the studio there, and Jen recorded with him remotely over Zoom.
Well, I guess just to kind of close this up, I want to know, what is the response that you'd like to get from the viewers of this film?
I think the response that I've loved hearing so far from people who've seen it has been friends and family, and some of the reviews I've seen coming out, is that it is just a powerful encounter with nature. I think so many people around the world, of course, haven't been able to travel in the last couple of years. And I think for me personally as well, just being in nature, having encounters with nature have really been the thing that have changed my heart and my mind around humanity's relationship with nature. And I think more than anything, I hope that this movie is a powerful encounter with nature. I hope that the images and sound and the music all really work together in concert to give people an experience that just can, open their hearts and their minds to a different kind of idea about what our relationship with nature could be. And just to contemplate some of those ideas in the film about short-term decision-making and downstream longer-term impacts.
It definitely has that power. And are you working on something else now? What's your next project?
Well, there is, and Jen has mentioned this, so I think I am allowed to say this. There's a thought that this is the second in a trilogy of films. So we have started thinking about what a third film in this Mountain River final film trilogy might be. And I'd really love to be able to do that. I think there's definitely more to be told in terms of these bigger poetic stories about humanity's changing relationship with nature and landscape and the human heart. So it would be really beautiful to be able to sort of get the team back together and continue telling the story. Would
it be the sky? Would it be the ocean?
There are lots of possibilities. It's a big, beautiful world. So there's a few different ones that we're contemplating. But there's a giant cosmos out there to explore.
That's right. The rest of your career.
That's right.
Well, now where can people see this movie? The people that have seen it, how can they tell their friends, you got to see this film? Where can it be seen?
Yeah, so it's come out already in the UK and Australia, but I'm actually not totally certain about the US release dates off the top of my head. It certainly will receive distribution there. Sorry, it might be worth cutting this answer actually, because I'm not 100% sure.
Okay.
Yep.
But hopefully there'll be some broadcast in there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, and for now, they can just go to your website and keep up on the news.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. And the international distributor is Dogwolf, so it's possible that their website has information on the US release dates and which cities that'll be playing into.
Oh, great. Well, thank you so much, Joseph, and thanks to Jennifer let her know how much we appreciated being able to share her film with our audience, and looking forward to your next one.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kelly.
Bye now.
All right, have a great day. Bye.